this precedes the Buddha. If you're going about 2,500 years ago, we know in a number of ancient civilizations, this type of practice was taken up, developed, honed over centuries, but the basics remain pretty much the same. So I'll say a little bit about the theory of this because I think it helps then frame the actual exercise. It basically starts from a very radical or almost counterintuitive proposition that our ability to know, to understand, to see things clearly, and to liberate ourselves from all kinds of afflictions, troubles, discontents, and find genuine happiness is, first of all, within our human capacity. It's not something outside of us. It's not something we need to go in search of, but it's an inherent capacity that we just have not either learned how to tap into or forgotten how to tap into it and covered it over with a lot of confusion and scrambling. And so this practice makes an hypothesis that the mind is meant for great things. It's meant to understand and know all. And the way that that is exercised or activated is by quieting, stilling, calming. Sometimes it's called quietism, referring to the movement of expanding the measure of the mind, not through activity, but through quietness and stilling. So the counterintuitive proposition is that the full capacity of our minds is activated paradoxically by quieting them. Now, I say it's a hypothesis because the teachers in this tradition say, explore this for yourself. Once you have the techniques, once you have the methods, just continue to explore this, and you will find if you apply these methods in a regular way, that you reaffirm, or if you want to recapitulate the awakening experience of all those who had practiced this beforehand, sages and enlightened beings. Enlightened beings means human enlightened beings, not deities beyond this world. So the proof of this is not a matter of faith, but rather a matter of application. And then the reward of that application is knowledge. You actually get insight. So this is expressed in many ways. I just quote some of the passages that illustrate it. One is very old, and it says, it's 4 lines, and it said, what we all wish to know is that, meaning the nature of reality, how things really are, and our place in the universe. That's the first line. What we wish to know is that. But our means of knowing that is this. That's the second line. In other words, we are the measure, the mode through which that is known. And then the third line asks the question, so how could we possibly know that? And then the fourth line says, only by cultivating this. So it's an interesting 4 lines, but coming back to the secret, if you will, or the technique of full knowledge, full understanding in the deepest sense, is not to be gathered by going outside and analyzing and dissecting or adding external facts and knowledge, but in opening up the full capacity of the mind to see things by cultivating this. And by cultivating this, it means an emptying out or quieting process by which your life becomes more unencumbered, your priorities become more clear, and you're able to settle your mind away from all the distractions that pull it off center, take it out of focus. So this is sometimes paradoxically called learning by subtraction. And the line that describes it says, in the worldly way of knowing, we're constantly adding to our stock of knowledge, sort of like downloading onto the computer. You're just sort of downloading. I know a lot of people have now downloaded all the Tripitaka on the computer. And that's good if you actually then study it. But if it just sits on the computer downloaded, it's of no use. It might as well be buried in a cave somewhere in Central Asia. So even though we add and add and add, if we don't stop to consider, if we don't deeply investigate, and even learning how to read the sutras, ironically, comes not through just language or translation, but the stilling of the mind. The sutra texts were spoken from a state of profound equanimity of mind called samadhi. And the only way we can access their meaning is to approach that samadhi ourselves. So it's kind of interesting. There was a Buddhist scholar who once said, I can't fathom how anybody could understand the meaning of a sutra without doing some practice of precepts and meditation, because these are spiritual texts and can be only fathomed by the spirit. So this learning by subtraction is actually not a dumbing down or a numbing of your consciousness, but it's a quieting, and when it gets very, very quiet, it is activated to the maximum. So this is the paradox. So the text says, learning by subtraction, instead of adding, we subtract, and we subtract, till we're down to a perfect emptiness by which or through which everything else is activated. So the meditation practice then that we're doing here, when you sit in this posture, you're quieting your body, your limbs, your breathing. Everything unplugged, so to speak, from all the distractions. The eyes aren't looking at sights, the ears are not listening to sounds, the nose isn't caught up in fragrances except for the one stick of incense that is burning. But after a while, you don't even notice that because there's no contrast. The tongue is curled gently to the roof of the mouth and not thinking of dinner, or, there's nothing going down. And then the body itself becomes very relaxed and still, undisturbed. And when that happens, now you have access to the mind ground where you begin to work on quieting, stilling, gathering in the mind, bringing it to this quiet but brilliant focus. You might think about it as, again, I was thinking when I was up in Maine, the use of binoculars to see something is only as good as the steadiness in my hands. So even though I have a good focus, I want to see something, but if my hands are moving and wiggling, I never get it really clearly into focus. So sometimes you can see meditation as a focusing technique, a technique that brings absolute focus, and then with focus comes clarity. Now, there's all sorts of techniques that are offered within the Buddhist tradition of how to quiet or focus or still the mind. And none of them are better than any others. So please rest assured that this is not something that you get grades of, better grades, there's a better style or a better technique. Sometimes that happens. You start meditating and you're using a technique, and then your mind seems scattered and you don't realize it's just because you didn't use the technique properly, but then you blame the technique for not calming your mind, and then your mind gets really anxious and says, I bet there's a better technique someplace else. And then you go and you find another technique and you start using it, but the same thing happens. Instead of using the technique uses you, your mind goes off again, and you keep running around shopping for better techniques. So there's a saying, deeply enter one technique or one gate. When one connects, they all connect. So which one's suited for you? Pick one and stay with it. The dumber, the better. The dumber, the better. In other words, don't use something that's get your active mind going, thinking it through. If it's a Sanskrit mantra and you don't understand Sanskrit, really good. because you won't then try to analyze what it means. Because the technique is not to get you to analyze something and then see it intellectually, but it's to calm and stop the mind from analyzing so it can see things clearly. I know this sounds counterintuitive. We're so used to using our minds in this active, scrambling way that we've almost lost the art of seeing and understanding through stillness, which is a far higher capacity of the mind. And I think you will find eventually in some of the neural and, how should I say it, the bioneural techniques that are coming out now to study the brain waves, how the mind works, the functional MRI on all this, will eventually go, wow, you know, when the mind is really calm and whatnot, it's like really powerful. They will discover this at one point. Right now, they're just sort of mapping that and trying to figure out what's going on. But eventually, I think we'll come to the realization that one of the highest uses of the mind that civilization has brought is this use that comes through this ancient technique of quieting and stillness. Yes?
But what if you've used a technique so long that through no fault of the technique itself, it becomes part of the background music of your own brain and you can barely even notice it anymore?
That's what I was saying before, is that the mind has now taken the technique and polluted it. And I will say to you, you could do another technique, but you'll do the same thing. And one point you have to then have a conversation within with that mind that took control, because you can multitask. You can recite Amitabha's name, you can say Guanyin's name, 2 tracks going, and then you can add a mantra on top of that, and your memorization of some sutra, and you'll still be thinking about groceries and taxes and everything else. And on one hand, you say, wow, my mind is really great. On the other hand, you've missed it. So you have to, that's why I said dumber the better. Take it and focus on it like your life depended on it. Do not allow your mind to take over, because it isn't the case that it didn't work. It's that you stopped using it. It's really interesting. There's one of my teachers to talk about the technique of getting fire through the rubbing of the stick. You know, and so you put the stick on and you usually have a bow and you go back and forth. And will it produce fire? Huh?
It's hard to do.
Okay. Well, my question is, it does produce fire if you stay with it and keep going and going and going. But if you go and say, where's the fire? Gang. Where's the fire? You know, you keep on, off, it doesn't work. So you have to sort of lose yourself in that till you and the thing become one, and then suddenly there's fire. This is the technique that you use in meditation. Don't look for a faster or more sophisticated technique. Just apply it with absolute focus, concentration. You can do this because we all have obsessive qualities way beyond our imagination. Think about the last thing you've obsessed about. Your career, your degree, your romantic life. Whatever you focused on, you can reach incredible obsessive concentrations. But from the sort of the spiritual tradition, it's not productive because there's no fruit. There's just burnout and you get an object, but it's a temporary thing and it passes. So you still have to bring almost that obsessive concentration to this technique. And it says when that mind reaches singleness on that technique, then the efficacious just opens by itself. So again, I want to caution against more techniques or feeling the technique failed or it's not working anymore, it's just background noise. It's background noise because in the foreground you've moved away from it. You've moved your mind away from that and said, my mantra, yeah, blah, blah, blah. And you put it over there kind of as a side thing, right? So understand this and just keep coming back to it. So you can use the name of Amitabha, Guanyin Pusa, you can use Om Mani Padme Om. There's different words that you can internally recite, and you just allow your consciousness, your attention to only focus on those and nothing else. Is it a battle? Yes, it's a battle.
How tough is it? However you've let your mind grow over with weeds, it's going to be that much tougher to bring it back. But it can be done. There's no other technique. I told a story once. I'll tell it briefly again because it illustrates it. I had the same problem you did. It always became background, and the foreground was my monkey mind chattering, chattering, chattering. And I never thought I could bring myself to focus concentration so that I could actually, move through the scatteredness to something more. And you know this story, but it's really illustrative. So Han Shan and I are out. We're doing our bowing pilgrimage. It's at night. We're sitting in the car, and it's about this time of the year, interestingly. And we're on the coast of California. And about 15 or 20 minutes in my meditation, always, my mind would go blah, 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 and the thing would go to the background, whatever I was reciting. And then I'd start remembering cartoons, advertising jingles, have different aspects of my life, and just I'd do this whole movie narrative. And of course, then the pain would come to the hips and the legs and the knees. 15 minutes. My Gung Fu was up to 15 minutes of holding a drop. And so this particular night, same thing, 15 minutes it starts, I go, and then suddenly, boom, something hits the car. And we're out in the middle of nowhere. There's no lights. There's no moon that night. The CHP has told us the day before that we should be a little cautious because they found body parts washed up on the beach, and there was a serial killer they were trying to find, but hadn't yet. Well, I tell you, that was very reassuring. So there you are, and you have no weapons to protect yourself. And your teacher has told you that you can't use weapons, and you can't even use Gung Fu to protect yourself. And then, boom, something hits a car, and I'm thinking, whoa, serial killer, here he comes. And I'm just listening now. My ears and Han Shan's ears are just turned. You ever see an animal outside when I hear something like the deer in the ear go focus? And I'm listening, and I'm listening, and I'm listening. I'm waiting for when is it going to come? What side is it going to come from? How are we going to defend? And I just want to really pick up where that thread's coming from. And now, 45 minutes has passed, and I'm still listening. And I think, wow, there's no pain. No pain in my hips, no pain in my knees. My breathing is totally relaxed. And as soon as I had that thought, of course, it all came back in. But then I went outside. I had the courage to go outside. We didn't really have a flashlight that worked, so we scrambled batteries to get one. Han Shan was very clear that I should go outside and check it out. Because I was the hoo-fa. What's out there? So I go around where it hit, and there was a broken pumpkin on the ground. So somebody had gone through it on the highway, so I was some kids. It was Halloween time. They took a pumpkin, threw it at that old car in the meadow, and it smashed, and they thought it was really fun, and they drove off, but they didn't know that they forced me into samadhi. After that, I realized, because then my teacher would say, every time I meet him, he'd say, so did you make it through the gate yet? Meaning the pain gate. And I'd say, no. And this time I could say, how did I make it through? And I told the story. And he just smiled, and he said, so, in the Halloween, he says, trick or treat. In other words, I was tricked into it by fear. Now, I'm not saying, replicate this. Don't sit in the car and have someone throw in and see if you can use fear to get in samadhi. I'm just saying the power of my focus and concentration, I just kind of let meander until I was really, really on the edge of what I thought might be death. So if you approach your meditation, and the texts say that, with that kind of diligence and concentration, as if you don't know tomorrow if you'll have the chance to do this, and it's a really important thing to resolve that, you'll do it. I know the people in this room, you all have that ability. You're not dummies. You're very, very smart. You can do this with anything. It's just doing it with your own mind. It's a little trickier, but it's the same technique. Focus, concentrate as if nothing else was going on. And you'd be surprised how fast you'll penetrate. Okay? So, now, once you know this, it's just a question of practice. If you're interested in more of this, maybe in a couple weeks, I'll bring out a wonderful lecture or talk by Venerable Shu Yun that he gave in Shanghai that goes into this in somewhat more detail of what to do with the mind. But he says the technique is you bring the 10,000 things back to one. So all the things you've been thinking, feeling, whatnot, you just bring them back and reduce them to this one, whatever you're focusing on. Amitofu, Guanyin Pusa, Om Mani Padme Hum, and you stay on that. You are bringing your concentration down. You're simply observing and repeating that quietly inside and letting your mind just settle in. It's like a pearl sinking down to the bottom of water. And just let it stay within that circle of sound. Om Mi Tofu, Om. Slowly, slowly, slowly. You can even match it with your inhale and exhale so that one sound is on top of the inhale. Ah, Mi, To, Fo. And you just repeat. And then go childlike. Don't worry what Amitabha means. Don't worry, am I going to be born in the Pure Land? None of that. Just you become one with that recitation and sound. And when that happens, then this mind's capacity starts to open up. That's why it says in the Shurangama, when that mad mind stops, that very stopping, the very stopping of that is Bodhi. It's not like it stops, then there's Bodhi. The stopping is Bodhi. And that capacity then is opened up immediately. Immediately. Immediately means not mediated by thought or feeling or impulse. It's just direct. This direct knowing is sometimes called Chan or Zen or Dhyana. It's the direct seeing things as they really are, unmediated by anything else. And that unmediated or mediate capacity is this great use of our mind. But we constantly move it into mediations. We constantly move it into filtering. Now you will feel very vulnerable when you do this, because your mind is used to thinking and calculating, thinking that you're holding and defending or planning and so forth. So at this point, you have to allow yourself to be very vulnerable. Just allow this time every day just to go into that space. And then once you find that space, you'll be able to carry that over 24/7 in what you're doing and still deal with things actually much better than you did before. So it's not just a capacity that happens in the meditation hall, but you begin developing that capacity that then carries over to everything else. Okay, questions? Yes.
Last week you were talking about focusing on like the somatic sensation.
The-
It was like 2 inches below the navel and 2 inches in.
I said bring your, that's the one if you want, the focus. You bring your attention down there. The breathing comes down there, your recitation goes down there, and just let it be there and then forget about it.
Can that be a technique, just to focus on that?
It is a technique. In fact, the ancients would say, if your mind can just stay in that center, unmoving, not one thought produced, you don't need a technique.
The verbal thing is just easier to keep going.
Well, yeah, the verbal thing is, it's called poison countering poison or fire countering fire. In other words, because we're always having this inner discourse, blah, 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 right? So you just give it one thing to blah, blah, blah on. And that one thing then will hold, you'll hope will hold it. They call it tethering the monkey. You have to tether it somehow. So you give it just something to recite, and recite it just single-mindedly. If I told you, there's a great tale told of the Buddha, and someone was scheduled to be executed. And one of the Buddha's disciples said, if I can show you that this person has the ability to reform themselves through real self-discipline, will you spare their life? And the ruler said, sure. So what was the technique? They gave him a bowl of oil filled to the brim and then said, if you walk through the marketplace, I don't know, like the Berkeley, what is this over here? The farmer's market, okay. You walk from the farmer's market one end to the other, and you don't spill a drop of oil from that bowl, you will gain your life and you won't be hanged. And now normally, you walk through that marketplace, there's all that great smell of food, there's dancers and jugglers, there's all kinds of strange people, beautiful people, ugly people, right? There's all kinds of sights and sounds. And normally you go through that, you're going blah, 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 blah. But he knew that if he did this without spilling a drop of oil, his life would be spared. He did it. Normally he couldn't do anything like that, but because his life depended on it, He just went through and didn't pay any attention. Anything came out, there wasn't any oil spilled over the side. So that singleness of focus is possible, but you have to have, if you have to have a technique, then take a technique to do it. Because otherwise you just say, well, I'm going to think nothing. Well, there was that. Now I'm thinking nothing. Well, that's kind of like thinking something. And and you start doing that. So just come back and let the technique. Lose yourself in the technique, and it will happen by itself. Make sense? It's so simple and yet so hard to do. So I'll give you a hint, though. One of the ways we go in this, it says the 10,000 things return to one, single focus. And then the next stage of meditation, where does the one return? But we won't go there tonight. Let's just start with bringing the 10,000 things back to one. 10,000 things back to one. Okay? Questions? Yes?
Where was that four-line poem from? Where the name of that poem?
That's from an ancient text called the Guanzu. It's probably 2,800 years. It's an interesting line, huh? Yeah. Yes? How long does it what? The painful legs? The pain of sitting meditation. Well, that pumpkin helped a lot. That was that was a real boost. What the pumpkin showed me was that I could do it, and the only reason I wasn't doing it is because I wasn't concentrating. So if you think the pain can be overcome through exercises, yoga, or through Darvan and Percocet and all that kind of stuff, which a lot of people bring to meditation sessions. Ask Hung Sure, his first meditation session, he brought some, painkiller. And I can make a lot of money selling you painkillers, but the actual technique, it's surprised. Go back to my experience, what I was saying. I was looking for some special technique, and I didn't realize that just by bringing the mind to singleness, the pain goes away by itself. It's absolutely amazing. And when you make that discovery, you go, whoa. I've been thinking if I focus on the pain, if I try this breathing technique, if I sit here long enough, it'll go away. And all you're doing with that is adding to the pain. Because the pain goes away with the singleness of focus. And it doesn't go away in the sense that it's there but you don't notice because you have single focus. It goes away because actually the circulation goes through the pain. It's a little bit like if you take a hose and you have it turned on and then you pinch it, it won't squirt out the other end and it'll bulge at that point. And the same thing, if you're not concentrating, that'll be twisted. Now, when you concentrate in a biophysical way, what happens is everything opens up. There's no obstructions. And so the pain actually melts and dissolves through singleness of focus. And now you start to begin to see how your mind is a very, very powerful tool. Not only how you perceive the world, but how you even feel within your own body and skin. Does that make... So there's no question of how long. If I told you it'd take a month, would that be okay? But it means you are moving around. That's my point. When your shoulders and your legs, they all hurt, you're moving around. Your mind's moving. I say this loudly because it's almost like we don't think it. We think, well, there's something with my body. But when you bring your mind to single focus concentration, all of that is gone. Now, if you move your body and whatnot, you've relieved it temporarily, but you just backed off of the issue. And you can do that, but you really won't make any penetrating progress that way until you actually... I want to say this cautiously. You use the pain as a teacher. It tells you that you're not focused and concentrated. And as you start to deepen your practice and you sit quietly, you'll have a movement of thought. Maybe you don't have just background, you've actually accomplished it. And as soon as you have that movement of thought, you'll feel a corresponding physical shift in something. You'll actually feel when you move off your mantra or your concentration, you'll have a corresponding physical sensation, pain or whatnot. And when you come back to that, everything quiet and stops again. So it's a kind of teacher in the sense that it's teaching you everything is made from mind alone. Ichi Wei Shin Zhao. At every level. And so even pain itself is something that is generated by the moving mind. And when the mind is still, that stops. Okay? So at the first stages, this is kind of what you're wrestling with. It's a very quiet wrestling match. And you're wrestling with your own mind. And you're negotiating with your own mind. Will you be still? Will you sit here for half an hour? Will you be quiet? Afterwards, I'll give you a mooncake or something. And you dog this way. And I said, oh, you promise me like one of those really cool mooncakes, not the cheap ones that come from Chinatown? But then, yeah, I'll give you that. Oh, it goes, okay, I can wait. And you just calm. And you find, oh, not too much pain. Okay? So you can see this in your life, too. When you're anxious and upset, you'll start to have psychosomatic things going on. Headaches, twitches, things with your digestive system. It's all affected. There's a mind-body continuum here. So as you calm your mind, your body will just naturally start to feel more calm. This is called zidzai, just self-ease that comes. And that's the first stage of meditation. Zidzai is when you've brought your mind to a focused constant and everything's just really comfortable. You don't want to stop there, but that's beginning. How long it takes, I don't know. I think some people might take 10 seconds and other people's 10 kalpas. But don't quit. That's the point. If you stay with it, for sure you'll have success. Okay? All right. Shall we do some text tonight? But I want to stress, don't set a time. Don't set a calendar. Don't go home and say meditation Friday and check off and give yourself A, B, C, D or anything like that. The only thing you did is did it. I did it or I didn't do it. Okay? That's the only chart to keep. I'm sorry. And don't say, I did it, but I did it better than her because I saw that she was really moving. You know. No Buddha got to be a Buddha. It's not competition by competing. I know they have competitive yoga now, but they're never going to have competitive Bodhi. Because the mind of win or lose is a mind that's actually going the opposite of Bodhi. So you have to stop fighting and competing not only with everybody else in this room, but even yourself. Okay. Text. So last time we finished up that all the dharmas are spoken to match living beings' potentials. Each and every skillful technique, and now goes back to your question, all these skillful techniques that we use in meditation are designed to break our attachments, our grasping. Ultimately, there is no dharma to give to people, which sounds kind of harsh, but this is actually kind of mind ground fundamental teaching. You see it in the Buddha in the Nirvana Sutra when they ask him for his final teaching. He says, I have no final teaching. I gave you no dharma. The life matter of birth and death is important. Cultivate. In other words, even at the end, the Buddha eschewed putting down a doctrine and dogma and said all of these were just simply Fangbian Upaya. If you attach to it, then you miss the point. So it says, why is there talk then of cultivation? Where are we? Okay, so this goes to this point. And it's easy to misinterpret if you say, oh, I just heard that all dharmas are expedients. There is no dharma to give. And then you might say, well, then there'd be no Buddha to get because I'm already a Buddha. So then you'd say, because I'm already Buddha and there's no dharma, why would I bother to cultivate? Good question, yes? Nobody's going to admit that they had that question, but it does arise. If there's nothing to get, nothing to obtain, there's fundamentally no dharma and there's no problem, then why come here and sit with your legs crossed. And he says, by cultivating, meaning we do this practice of Shila, Samadhi, Prajna, Sanwulo, Shui, the three non-outflow studies, by cultivating our persons, we attend to this present mind and can thoroughly remove the shadows of habitual deluded thinking. This is where we must focus our effort. This is cultivation. What do you hear in that? Do you hear an answer to the question? Really look at this passage. He's asking a question. If this is true, if you could say everything is empty, then why do we cultivate? He gives an answer. But does this answer satisfy you? Does this answer make sense? I see some heads shaking no, it doesn't. Yes. Right. He says, thoroughly remove the shadows. There's we must focus our efforts. So he's saying, why do we cultivate? And you're saying, yes, because there's shadows, metaphor, there's obstructions, there's occlusions covering that natural mind. But where do they come from? Would be the question.
Actually, her question was...
She had an answer.
Yeah, she said that we didn't notice that we had those shadows. It's not where did those shadows come from.
Is that what you were saying, that we don't know we have the shadows? What would be the sign that you didn't have the shadows? How would that manifest? Okay. You can use a metaphor saying you're walking and your shadow's behind you and you don't see it. Until the sun goes the other direction, then you do see it. And then you freak out and say, I didn't have it before, now it's here, and you go crazy. And then the sun goes down and it's gone again and you feel happy, and then, you repeat this. You could say, what he's saying here, the key is attending to this present mind. We cultivate only because the gateway to no shadows, or the gateway to having shadows, is in the present mind. You following? In other words, it's not something in the past and it's not something in the future. It's not even something you attain, but it's rather something you maintain. You maintain the present mind that is nowhere attaching. Remember the six patriarchs line. Generate the mind that is nowhere grasping, attaching, seeking, wanting. In that present mind, if you can stay there, thought after thought, you are in Bodhi. But if you can't stay there, you leave it. So he's saying, why do we cultivate? We don't have to cultivate unless this present mind moves again. Which goes back to your question. If there's no movement from this, then there's no need to cultivate. The cultivation becomes the antidote to losing the present mind. Yes? No? Kind of obscure? You what? What he means by this present mind is the mind that sees things as they really are, is nowhere attaching and grasping and not worrying or anything like that. That is what's called the natural mind. But we move from that. Something arises, we reach out, we grasp, and we're down a road. And so the cultivation then comes letting go of that, penetrating, seeing through, and getting back to that center again. Now, why I say it's maintaining rather than attaining, again, if you look at the Sixth Patriarch Sutra, he says, if in one thought you are unconfused, in one present thought you're unconfused, in that thought you're Buddha. And if in thought after thought you're unconfused, in thought after thought you're Buddha. So it's a maintaining of an equilibrium, of not moving off that center in thought after thought. Not something you just get sitting here. And it's tested by how you respond to the myriad things around you. So it's a really active, dynamic way of living your life and asking, am I staying centered? Am I staying in that true spot? Not being moved left or right, not being turned by states. Ru Budong, it's called, thus unmoving. You can see how hard this is on one hand, and yet it's the ultimate gate to one's freedom. Because if you can confront all of this without moving, you're okay. Normally we don't. Then the text says, but if in one thought you're confused, then at one thought you're an ordinary person, you're not a Buddha. And at thought after thought you're confused, and thought after thought you're ordinary. So what I want to stress here is that this is not some kind of attainment you get after 6 weeks at the monastery and you get a certification from Monk Sure that says you've reached Bodhi. And you go like, whoa, I'm going to retire now, man. No, that's already moving off. It's not. It's always in the here and now. Now you start to think, well, wait, when it talks about beginningless and endless, it is talking about a state of maintenance, of equanimity that goes thought after thought all the time. Even death itself is not an end. Whoa, that gets really, it's just another change. Yesterday you might have thought about today, but today is just now. It may be not what you thought it would be. It's just now. And maybe right now you're just here, and maybe you're not. Maybe you're thinking about tomorrow, or you're thinking about yesterday. But neither of them can be any place except all you have is now. It's really funny. I mean, we fight this because we want to make plans, we want to have control, but there is none. There's just now. And so if you stay in that center now, you'll always be okay. That's my teacher says, everything's okay, no problem. It's when you leave that to something that is not attending to here and now that it all goes amiss. So it's really describing a very dynamic, existential way of being, not an attainment, not a faith-based thing. It's just like something you use and apply all the time. And you're always sort of self-correcting. That's what the cultivation. After a while, it becomes natural. And you don't have to correct so much because you get a feel where the center is. You get a feel for that, and you catch yourself faster and faster when you're going off. Before the anger arises, before the jealousy, before the fear, you can see the beginnings of it, and you just pull back to the here, and it's gone. So this is why he's saying you have to cultivate unless you've attained the state where you're always. Now look at the next part. He says, if we can all of a sudden stop a single thought of our deluded thinking, immediately in that stopping we see the true mind. You see, again, when the man-mind stops, stopping is Bodhi. Then he says, fundamentally, this mind is complete, radiant, and all-embracing. There's nothing lacking. It's pure in itself. This is what it means to awaken, is to understand and see that. There's nothing else to cultivate, nothing further to awaken to beyond this true mind. So he says, why do we cultivate? It's to come back to that place that's natural, whole, and complete, and once we're there, everything's okay. If we could stay there, there'd be no reason to cultivate. So cultivation is a temporary balancing act, a self-cultivating art of refining your humanity till you're at the point where truly there isn't anything wrong, there isn't anything off. And you're just moving through the conditions, completely centered and at ease. That's the goal. Sounds very complicated, and yet at the other hand, it kind of sounds like something you could do. So the meditation practice is only like kindergarten in the sense that here you sit where you controlled all the variables for a couple of minutes. Your body's variables are quiet. Normally we're all grasping and moving, and that gets quiet. Your breathing quiets. And if you can quiet the mind, you can actually get to that center, that dynamic center, the eye of the storm, where you're in the midst of conditions and you're not changing and you're not moved. You're not numbed out, you're not unconscious, you're right there, you're centered, and you're seeing everything like it is. You ever see these great scenes in the movies where they slow it down and the hero is in the center and the bullets and arrows are flying, is boom, boom. You know, it's like that. When your mind's really still, everything slows down. You can see things coming from a mile away. You don't have to even have caller ID. It's like, whoa. Somebody comes in the house, you can feel where they're coming from already because you're quiet. Because you're quiet, you're receptive. It's reception, it's not projection. Most of the time we're projecting. What this is an exercise is in receiving. It's receptive. And as you receive, you pick up things so fast. Even getting sick, you can catch the movement of the sickness in your body before it takes over. Because you're so receptive. Our sensitivities are numbed by the way we live our lives. We take this marvelous tool of our body and mind and we pulverize it till it can hardly function. And we're so stressed out, we're about to die, and somebody says, "You look stressed out." Do I? You know. Whoa, yes, you do. And then we go to a doctor, but it's almost too late. Because the sensitivity mechanisms have been so numbed by the way we direct our lives. So all we're doing in meditation is developing this sensitivity. And once it starts to develop, things become really easy because everything slows down. You look down a path and you say, "Oh, I know where that path goes. I'm not going to go down that path. I went down that path before." It kind of slows down. Something comes and faces you, you see it coming. What is it like? It's like that magic moment in baseball where the baseball then slows down. You ever see these movies that do it? And the person's just watching and they're swinging the bat and the baseball is coming in very slowly and it's a perfect hit. They perfectly connect. This gung fu of doing things without doing it, they say is wu wei. This is what it means. You can do it effortlessly because you're not mediating it with all these projections. You're actually, in the martial arts, they use this expression all the time, right? You become quiet and receptive, and you can see the movements, and you just respond to the movements. You're not projecting out. Nor are you even projecting your fear, which slows you down. I'm trying to give concrete examples you can see on a very mundane level how you might use this. Planning an event. If you just stay centered and focused, things just come out. As soon as you get moved by the hyperness of it, you just get torn up. Doing an exam, it's the same thing. The more you can relax and stay centered, the better your receptivity and the better your performance will be. Now that's a very, what I'd say, commercial application of this, and that's why some people get into the zen of this, the zen of that, zen of sports, zen of making money, the zen of blah, blah, blah. Because it does have that component that allows you to perform more successfully because you're more focused and reading things correctly. But that's not what this is about. This is about really the zen of bodhi. It's the zen of getting completely free. It's a higher use of this. Okay, hard to get through. Let me read you a passage tonight. I was going to do a Mary Oliver poem, but I'll postpone that till next week. But I want to show you a very famous passage. Can you crank up the raft, so to speak? Okay. So this part illustrating what part of the passage we just read. Anybody want to guess? So while this is called a Zen or a Chan text, and some people think, well, it's different from other Buddhist texts. So I'm going to give you tonight a Pali text from the Theravada tradition that I think perfectly illustrates a line that the Chan Master Han Shan just did. Anybody want to guess what the line is we just read tonight? You say, "No, I'm just attending to the here and now. I'm not looking for a reward. You told me it's not a competition, so if I put up my hand and it's the right answer, I'll go up, and if I put up my hand it's the wrong answer, I'll be dejected. I'm going to stay in the middle." No. Okay, so you don't have to answer, but did anybody want to guess where this is coming from? What line from Han Shan tonight? How about if I read it first? Okay, so this is from the Majjhima Nikaya. Okay, the Majjhima Nikaya is a series of discourses by the Buddha. It's got some wonderful stuff in here. One I'll give to you later. It's called the Mango Sutta. It's really not about mangoes. I don't know why but it's called the Mango Sutta. But in that sutta, Buddha's son Rahula asked the Buddha, "How can I cultivate?" He's heard this passage sort of from Han Shan. And he says, "So how do I really cultivate? Tell me how to really do it." And the Buddha gives him a teaching of how to use the meditation mindfulness technique to his daily life. So maybe one of the classes coming up will bring that one out. It's also from the Majjhima Nikaya. It's a really good, powerful passage. But this one, let's look at this tonight. So, O bhikkhus, what's a bhikkhu? I'm just checking. An endangered species, right. O bhikkhus, even this view, which is so pure and clear, if you cling to it, if you fondle it, if you treasure it, if you are attached to it, then you don't understand the teaching is similar to a raft, which is for crossing over and not getting hold of. So what is he saying? Even this view. Huh? Right, but what he's talking about the Dharma. Okay? The right view, the Dharma, that he just gave a discourse, and they all thought, wow, that's really good, that's a Dharma. And he said, aha, be careful. Even this view, which is so pure and clear, you can't cling to it, follow, blah, blah, blah. And then he gives an example. O bhikkhus, a man is on a journey, let's say a person. She comes to a vast stretch of water. On this side of the shore is dangerous, but on the other side it's safe and without danger. No boat goes to the other shore, which is safe and without danger, nor is there any bridge for crossing over. Okay, so a problem. On one shore, very dangerous, but there's no bridge, there's no ferry, there's no way to get across. This sea or expanse of water is vast, and the shore on this side is full of danger, but on the other shore, it's really danger-free. It would be good, therefore, says the person, if I would sit on this shore and despair and wait for someone to come with a boat. Not there, right? No. It would be good, therefore, if I gather grass, wood, and branches and leaves to make a raft. Fang bien. And with the help of the raft, cross over safely to the other side. And I like this line, exerting myself with hands and feet. Now, it's not enough to make the raft and then just lay on the raft. And that person, O bhikshus, gathers grass, wood, branches, leaves, makes a raft, and with the help of that raft, crosses over the other side, exerting with hands and feet, having crossed. Part of the reason there's this repetition in here, by the way, is because these were passed along in an oral tradition. And so the repetition is a mnemonic device to help with memory. He gets to the other side, he's there, exerts himself, hands and feet, having crossed the other side, he thinks, this raft was great help for me. With its aid, I have crossed safely the other side, exerting with hands and feet. I got an idea. It would be good if I carried this raft on my head or my back wherever I go. You never know. Now the Buddha says to the bhikkhus, if you act in this way, would it be proper? Would it be smart? Would this be good? And they said, no. No, sir, but no, duh. In which way, then, would he be acting properly? What should he do? They said, well, once he crossed over the other side, he should think, well, the raft helped me. It's been a great aid. I'm on the other side, hands and feet, I exerted. It'd be probably better just to beach this raft on the shore, or moor it, or leave it afloat, and then went on my way wherever that may be. That would be a proper use of the raft. Okay? Then the Buddha says, in the same manner, O bhikkhus, I've taught you a doctrine similar to a raft. It's for crossing over and not carrying. Produce the thought that is nowhere attached. Literally not getting hold of. You, O bhikkhus, who understand that the teaching is similar to the raft. Now, this is the last line. It's very important. You should give up even Dharma. In other words, the actual teachings themselves, at some point, once they've served the purpose of getting you to the other shore, you can give that up. Don't turn it into dogma and doctrine. Don't turn it into a capital R religion. And more, don't say, my Dharma religion is better than yours. Now you're not only carrying the raft, but you're hitting other people over the head with it. Okay? He says, you should give up the good things. How much more should you give up a Dharma? That which is not even up to the raft. Like your anchors and weights that you carry around that weigh you down. So he's saying, the unwholesome things of this life, of this world, of course you want to give up. But even when you pick up the good and the wholesome, you should see that it's merely a raft to get you back to your innate wholesomeness and goodness. And once you've accomplished that, then even that should be let go of. So this is a famous passage, fairly unique, I think, in a lot of philosophies I've ever studied, that basically takes the core of the teaching and says, this too is temporary. This too is an expedient. It is not ultimate. This is not ultimate truth. There's only truth that is instrumental in getting you to some place that's beyond attaching, grasping, needing, having, holding. And again, it points back to the absolute independence of your being, that you don't really need anything once you're there. So it goes back to that innate goodness, that innate wholeness, and says, once you're there, don't pick up anything and you're fine. Okay? So now, where does this refer to? Anybody? You can't answer because you come to the translation, so it's not fair. Anybody guess where this is referring to in Han Shan's talk? This is a Theravada Pali text, famous passage. You'll find it alluded to in the Avatamsaka Sutra all over the place, this approach to the Dharma. But where does it appear in the text here tonight? Who said that? Yeah. Ultimately, there is no Dharma to give to people. So that line there that Han Shan quotes has a reference to this parable, and you'll find it in many other places. Yes?
So the raft story, I've heard it many times, but I now have a question. You've told us many times that you're never really there. You don't just get to the other side and go, it's over. So could we say that the aspect of the raft that the person should keep with him is the centeredness and the alertness of mind that allowed him to realize that in that condition a raft was what was needed to go forward?
See, I love this. You see, when you do primary text in this way and you read them, all kinds of things come up. All kinds of questions come up. And this is really good. And I might say, next week, tell me what you think about this. Investigate it. So that's one answer. One answer might be interpreting the other shore to be just this mind, here and now. The other shore is not a place, but it's a state of mind. It's a state of equanimity at all times. It's just another metaphor for that. So.
But we can't be confident of clearing our mind to the point where it's just there and not work at it.
You can be confident by doing it. In other words, there's no confidence except in the act of doing it. And once you stop doing it, the confidence is gone. So the confidence in Buddhism is the raft that you exert and use to get to someplace else. It's not like somebody saves you. It's not like somebody provides it. And your confidence in the raft is only needed until you get to the other shore. After that, the confidence is already embodied by the very act that you're on the other shore, meaning you're in the right state of the mind at all times. You got to see all these things as dynamic rather than abstract or passive. And then you realize these are psychodynamic tools for liberating us right back into the here and now, which is the only fulcrum where there's liberation. As soon as you think, damn, that was a good raft, I wish I would have kept that. Or will I need it in the future? Maybe there's another. Then you're no longer on the other shore. So even on one shore, you're still in need of a raft. So this sometimes points to what's called the emptiness of Dharma, one of the teachings. So I remember we were traveling once, and I tell you this story just because it's easy to start head-tripping this and become very intellectual about it, the emptiness of Dharma and so forth, and you say, well, if everything is empty, then why would we cultivate, blah, blah, blah. So I was traveling with my teacher once, and he said, Master, if everything is empty, then why would I need to cultivate? And the master simply looked at him and he said, if everything is empty, why would you need to ask? Now, if you think about this, this is it's not just a clever answer, it's really pointing to the heart of what it means to be, if indeed everything is empty, then why would you need to ask that question? Moreover, he was saying the spirit in which it was asked, which was to challenge the teacher. So he was the teacher at the place before. Somebody invited my teacher to come there, and he felt displaced, so he thought he'd do a little Chan dueling there. And I think he didn't come much after that. Anyhow, I share that with you. Okay, any announcements? I assume there's no more questions? Yes?
Next Sunday evening from 6 to 8 at Verhoeven Monastery, Professor Du will give a lecture on the history and the development of the Buddhist canon, the Tripitaka. So we'll be here at 6.
She pointed over, but then nobody saw who Professor Du is. There's Professor Du. He's visiting from Taiwan, and he's the one I told you about last week who's actively changing the Tripitaka over to a digital version. So the lecture next week will be, and there's the 3 baskets. And it's on the history of that development of the Tripitaka.
Right, leading up to the recent digitalization of the Tripitaka, so the online version.
So in a sense, what you're getting is a view of the raft and how it was put together over time, because you have to remember when the Buddha spoke, no one wrote it down. There were no tape recorders. The Buddha himself never wrote anything. Chances are there would be no way a Buddha would get tenured in a university today. But since he didn't write anything down, the Tripitaka that Professor Du is going to talk about is something that came at a later date when the oral teachings were then transferred into a written tradition. And there's a very interesting history to that. So if you have time next Sunday. Anything else?
So I know tomorrow, I read from through email, tomorrow at the Dharma Drum Center in Sunnyvale, Professor Du is going to give a talk from 2 to 4:30. So what will be the topic of the talk?
That will be, the history of how I met Master Han and all his collection, how can we use the collection into reading the Tripitaka.
So people are in Silicon Valley, you can.
Initially, I thought Professor Du came here to kind of study and rest a little bit. It looks like you'll have to go back to Taiwan to rest. Yeah.
I'm sorry, what time are you speaking tomorrow? 2?
And Hung Sure is back from the Midwest, so he will have his class tomorrow night. Those of you who knew Helen Wu, and probably you did, or Wesley Wu, there's going to be a memorial service at the City of 10,000 Buddhas on Sunday afternoon. Some of us be going to. He passed away, and they're bringing his ashes up. This goes way back, so probably the newcomers here wouldn't know him, but he was a physician for both Hung Sure and myself, and for the Master. So he not only saved lives, he didn't create them, but he brought them in to the tune of 6,000 babies he delivered. So, yeah. But I would say he's an example of somebody who went to medical school, and once he got out of medical school, he devoted his practice to completely taking care of people who were on the margins, being able to pay or get good medical service. And he kept his clinic for years down in L.A., in a rough and tumble neighborhood, a very simple clinic. He and Helen built it, and he kept his practice up, treated thousands of people pro bono. Many people in that larger Latino community just cried when they heard that he had passed away. And that morning, even though he could have retired at 64 or 65 and been completely fine, he kept practicing every day until he was 85. He died at 85, and the day he died, that morning he treated 3 patients for nothing. came back home, had a massive heart attack, and collapsed. So at the age of 85, he was still doing that kind of work. I don't know what his state was, but for me, it's an illustration of the spirit of a bodhisattva, of somebody who gives selflessly for others and actually spends, even to the last moment of their life, just giving, doing the paramita of giving. So none of us can control where we're going to die or when it's going to happen, but we can control how we live. And so my example I get from him is make something of one's life and don't worry about how it ends. That's all you can control. Which ties into the Mary Oliver poem, but there's no time. So we'll do it next week.
Respect to the Triple Jewel.